Magmar. Oh, Entropic Gaze, right. From one, one bugbear onto the other. So, I'm going to preface this by saying I actually think this card is fine. And I'm going to make my case for it. So, I'm not really a big fan of burn decks. I don't like how you can just drag your stuff and click on the opponent's face in games like this in Hearthstone. And even Magic, if you build a burn deck, your deck is full of lands and cards that deal 3 damage to your opponent. And so your opponent can't really win without gaining 3 life a turn for the entire game, or killing you first. That killing you first part is important. The reason I quite like Entropic Gaze and Tectonic Spikes, we might as well almost lump these in together. The reason I really like Entropic Gaze is that because it draws your opponent cards, it digs them towards their burst and their defensive abilities. So they can, if they have a bunch of healing in their deck, they can play it. They can heal themselves for 3 damage a turn for a few turns. If they have burst in the deck, they can play it too. And as a Magmar player, you will deal damage to yourself. Tectonic Spikes deals damage to you. Elucidator deals damage to you. Attacking your opponent or killing their minions deals damage to you with your general. Rancor rewards you for taking damage. We'll get to that in a minute. So, my first few games with this deck, with Starhole and Burn, I got my opponent to 10, set up lethal, and then died. Because I was also on 10. And they can kill me too. So I quite like the fact that, although Entropic Gaze accelerates the game towards a conclusion, it also helps your opponent keep up. I think that's a very valuable trait. I've always been a big fan of the line of text, each player draws a card. I think it's nice because it doesn't give one player card advantage, but it keeps the game flowing. In Magic, it helps you draw past clumps of land, or draw 2 lands if you're missing them, so you can play your spells in a timely fashion and be a part of the game. In Duelyst, it helps you find your outs, it helps you find answers, it helps you make tempo plays curve out properly for both players. And given that you, the Magmar player, are paying the privilege of spending mana on this stuff, although it's dealing damage to your opponent, and the card is great, obviously, it also helps your opponent fight back. And I think that's very healthy. Compare Burnhorn to even just Control Vath from like a couple of patches ago, where it would play Tagetes when she was OP and hit you for a bunch of damage. Then he would attack you and play Mercantor and kill your creature and hit you for a bunch of damage. You'd play another creature and you'd play Mercantor and kill it and hit you for a bunch of damage and then hit you with his face. And you were just taking damage every turn. You were taking 3, 5, 6, 7 damage every turn. And you couldn't do much about it. With this burn deck, it doesn't play like that. It's faster, and it's better against control and something, you get to mill people and so on, but I really much prefer playing against this burn deck because they have smaller creatures and smaller cards that don't always affect the board in such an explosive way. They don't play Plasma Storm, so you can play Primus Shieldmaster and it'll do stuff. When was the last, like against Songhai, they would just play all their cards that don't care about your cards. They play their range minions and their burn spells and their lantern foxes and just volley you to death from miles away. Again, this burn deck doesn't do that. It tries, but some of the cards have to get up close and personal, and it draws you towards your healing, it draws you towards your burst. So you can fight back. I think this burn deck is the healthiest burn deck I've seen in many of the games of the CCGs I played for a long time. And I'm really surprised that people are as upset about it as they are. The deck is absurdly popular, I guarantee you that. I spent most of last season in Diamond, as is usually the case. And I was actually playing against mostly Lionar and Fae. And I was like, oh, well, I'm just, it's Temple Lionar for days up here. I don't know what everyone's worried about. And then my partner, Katie, who you saw in the background a moment ago, was going through gold and was just playing against Magmar. It was absurd. Like, the field was like 80% the same deck. And she was playing it as well, so it was just mirrors for days. Just everyone going face. It was really silly. But the thing is, that's interesting, right? Because it points out that the Magmar deck isn't so good that it floods Diamond. This was fairly late in the season. Like, Katie was climbing because she was beating the mirror, right? I gave her the advice I found myself when I was tinkering with this deck, which is cut the Elucidators, and play 2 Earth Spheres. Helps a lot. And play Blood Tier Alchemist as well. Secret tech. But I digress. Point is, I think this card, although it looks bad and it allows you to see some very, like, completely absurd levels of burst. You know, you can deal 12 damage for 6 mana with Entropic Gaze. And in theory, you can play Entropic Gaze, draw into another one, cast it, draw into the third, cast it. If you get really lucky. I have, by I mean Katie, has hit and out of Entropic Gaze, drawing Entropic Gaze before. It can be done. I was watching over her shoulder. But, you know, that's not very common. I think it's okay to have a card this powerful when it has the same balancing effect of letting your opponent play the game against the burn deck. Because the biggest problem with most burn decks is you don't get to do anything, right? They're just a bit too fast because they don't care about fighting for the board. They're not spending mana on that. Every turn is just your face, your face, your face. You know, like, oh, well, okay. But this deck digs you to the cards in your deck that actually help. The provokes, the healing, the burst. And the stuff in your deck that's clunky and irrelevant, you can ignore because you've got other cards coming to your hand. I think that's really good. I think that's very healthy. Rancor. So this card is sweet. I like the... So there's one point about Magmar, is that they don't have the ability to move their own minions around. So cards like Repulsor Beast and Demonic Lure are great against Magmar because their minions don't get any speed boosts and can't be moved. They don't have a Magnetize or whatever. Once a Magmar minion's far away, they can't really do anything with it. So Rancor would be pretty nuts if they could. You know, this card would be able to sit in a corner and then get Mist Dragon Sealed or whatever, let's pretend, and attack the opponent for like 14. That's obviously not on. In a faction where Rancor can't be accelerated, it's brilliant. It plays really well. I like how, especially in the burn mirrors we talked about a moment ago, it scales with the amount of damage your general has taken, so it kind of lets you counterattack if your opponent lets it get near them. And so what ends up happening is you use Rancors to corral space, and if you can kind of bait your opponent into letting the Rancor get near enough to them to get a hit in, it's this big swing. As an opponent of the Magmar player, if they play their Rancor somewhere off to the side, where, you know, it can access a mana tile or whatever, that lets you run away from it, you can just avoid it for the whole game, and it might be like 20 power by the end, but it doesn't matter because it didn't hit you. And, you know, on top of all that, it can be dispelled, it can be killed the turn it comes in. So there's quite a lot of counterplay to this card. And I just kind of like that Magmar get like a, you know, a 9-3 for 2 or whatever. The way it actually plays out, your opponent obviously has to respect it because the card gets nuts, but it never lets you pull that far ahead because it only ever deals as much damage as you've taken. And so trying to set up Rancor, you take damage. So it comes back to the same thing with Entropic Gaze. The card's very powerful, but at the same time it gives your opponents avenues to win. If you get greedy and you're like, oh yeah, I'll just take this damage to power up my Rancor, but then you use the Rancor for a trade or it's out of reach of the opponent, you're actually giving your opponent a lot of extra room because now you're enabling them to burst. And that's really cool. I think that's actually a good design. Like, a design that encourages the Magmar player to play dangerously, which is, you know, obviously something Magmar players do anyway, because that's what Vath does. You know, you play dangerously, you smash them in the face, that's good. So I like that it's another award for that. That, yeah, gets your character attacking them, but it's very aggressive, so you don't play it in like the Earth Sphere-y control decks as much. You play it in aggro decks, where you don't have loads of defensive cards, loads of healing. So your opponent can actually punish you for taking that much damage. So I think this card is pretty sweet. And again, I from my perspective, I do like how this Magmar burn deck has come together. I'm enjoying it. Tectonic Spikes. So this is basically Entropic Gaze writ large, and I already covered a lot of the benefits of that. So I just want to say that I think this card is sweet. It's a cool design. It cycles through your deck, so it rewards you for playing lots of cheap stuff, and I like those cards. I like draw spells with downsides like this. You know, the deal 3 damage to your own face, perfect example. Like, this card rewards you for being faster than your opponent, and it's got that written on it. Like, if you can empty your hand faster than them, you can mill them with it, and you get card advantage. if you can make their life total matter more than yours, it's like dealing 3 to their face and nothing to yourself. That's awesome. You know, again, like we said with Draining Wave, like an hour ago or whatever, it asks a question. And it's a question that personally I enjoy answering. I like playing decks that are lots of cheap, efficient stuff. Even if they're not aggro decks, I like playing tempo decks most. Those are my dreams. I love, one of the things I like about Magic is that you can build, like most competitive decks in a lot of the older formats, don't feature any spells that cost more than like 3 mana. So everything's really low to the ground, really efficient, really elegant and clean. And you can play 2 or 3 spells in one turn a lot of the time, provided you have enough cards in hand. I enjoy that sort of play, so I really like this card because it supports and rewards it. Thraix. Thraix? I have no idea how to pronounce this. I tried using Thraix and I couldn't get it to work. It was just a bit clunky. And again, I think that shows that the Blood Surge mechanic is kind of working as intended. I think with the right deck, this card could be very powerful. I've heard of a couple of people doing it with like Starholm Pokemon builds, where you play loads of little cheap dudes and battle pets and stuff, and then you play this and your minions are all now massive, and your opponent is like, oh, I can just hit it with my face and it dies, but I take 4, oh no. Repeat until you win. So I quite like Thraix as a design. I'm sort of ambivalent about it, but I think it's a reasonable thing to have around. Again, it would be really annoying if it worked every time, but as a 4 mana play that you can only do sometimes, I think that's pretty balanced. And as a nice way of making games full of cheap stuff, decks full of cheap stuff relevant in the late game, great. The world needs more of those. Drogon. Drogon is pretty sick. This card is absurdly powerful. To the point where I don't know if I like it. I think it's a cool design. Anything that says double on is inherently appealing. Oh man, it doubles? That's sick. It's nuts. Man. But that's a lot of damage. So I mentioned earlier that my lady friend has a Magmar aggro deck. She doesn't own Mechanical Warbeasts. So we put in Drogon plus Adamantine Claws. Oh my god. Right, suppose you've already used Vast Bloodborne spell once. Right, that's pretty reasonable by this point in the game. You have 7 mana. You play Claws. You flash Reincarnation Drogon. You Bloodborne spell again. You hit your opponent for 16! 16, you started the turn with 3. That's bonkers. Like, I think that counts as being sweet. Like, it's a 3-card combo that requires you to be near the opponent. It's probably not overpowered. But oh my god, when you die to this card, it's like, oh crap. Like, you're on 20, and then they hit you with a minion, and they Drogon, or like double Drogon or something, and you just get killed. You're like, oh, okay. I guess we stop now. And from the opponent's perspective, they spend a lot of time like setting it up, they're maneuvering into position. So I think when you're playing with Drogon, it's very satisfying. It's a good card. And I like how it lets Varth do the Sarge thing of like, yeah, I'm going to attack into this big minion, and I'm going to tank a bunch of face damage, but I don't care because I'm Varth. So it feels really Magmar. It's a very, very, very flavorful card. But from the opponent's perspective, you're like, oh no, a Drogon? Oh crap, I'm dead on it. And then you just die. You're like, oh shit. Well, I guess I concede. That's that then. So there's cards that feel very abrupt for the opponent. I'm not sure how much of a fan I am of them. But I think I have to give this card a thumbs up just because of how flavorful it is. Finally, Valknu's Seal. So I guess this just makes... does this make like a 225, or does it count how much health your general has? Or what I'm saying is I've never seen anyone actually play this, but it seems quite powerful. I mean, making a 225 for 4 after a turn is pretty good. You can play it with Mooring Cur, I guess. And then maybe it's 5 power? I'm not sure. Like, again, from a design perspective, I like that this card asks a question. I think that's cool. What I don't like about it is how it's really not obvious how it works. You know, does it copy buffs on your general? Does it copy artifacts? Does it have artifacts on it, like the copy? Does it copy your health? I guess so. Does the egg summon in a space next to you or anywhere on the battlefield? It's really not obvious what the card actually does. And obviously I can fix all that by playing with it, but I haven't bothered because I can't tell what it does. It's a bit of a catch-22. So with cards like this that are a little unclear, that unclarity can be enough to keep anyone from actually playing with them, which is a bit sad. Because, I mean, it looks funny. It probably is funny, but I have no idea.